Some people marry for love, others for money, but what if I told you there was a woman who married only to make her husbands vanish without a trace? Ego was the kind of woman no one could ignore. Her beauty was beyond words. She was a vision, a goddess walking among mortals. Her beauty was more than just skin deep, it was hypnotic, enchanting. When she stepped onto the streets, time seemed to slow. Men forgot their wives, their jobs, their very names, as they turned to watch her. They wanted to be near her, to love her, to give her everything. And many did. Women whispered in envy, wondering how one woman could hold such power. But Ego knew. She was born to be desired, worshipped, and adored. And she was willing to do whatever it took to keep it that way. She lived a life of luxury without ever working a day in her life. The richest men in the city fought for her attention, showering her with gifts, cars, jewelry, designer clothes, and mansions. She moved from one luxury apartment to another, each more expensive than the last. People whispered, wondering how she always found someone to take care of her. How did she always manage to find the wealthiest men? Why did none of her admirers ever last? But no one dared to question Ego to her face. One day, she met Chief Okafor, one of the richest men in the city. He was older, but that didn't matter. He was captivated by her beauty, and his heart was weak for Ego. He proposed quickly, desperate to make her his. Their wedding was grand, held at her father's old mansion. The entire city was invited, dancers, musicians, the finest caterers. Laughter and music filled the air. The guests danced, ate, and drank until late at night, but what none of the guests knew was that they were celebrating more than just a wedding. They were unknowingly witnessing the beginning of another disappearance. Now before we continue, if you have watched up until now, it is because you enjoyed the story. Please be kind enough to give this video a like, drop your comments, and subscribe for more interesting stories like this. Now back to the story. The next morning, Chief Okafor was gone. No trace of him was ever found. People assumed he had left on a sudden business trip. But the days turned into weeks, then months, and still, he never returned. Ego mourned for a short while, but soon, she was seen with another man. Another rich man. Then another. Over the next decade, she married 10 more times. Each time, the wedding was lavish, held at the same venue, her father's old mansion. And each time, the groom vanished after the wedding night. People talked, but no one could prove anything. Some said she was cursed. Others said she was a witch. But Ego was untouchable. She grew richer with each marriage, inheriting everything her missing husbands left behind. She inherited fortunes, estates, and businesses. She became one of the wealthiest women in the city, untouchable in both status and influence. With her wealth growing, Ego became a big giver in the church she attended. Every Sunday, she would sit in the front row, dressed in the finest attire, her jewelry sparkling under the church lights. When it was time for donations, Ego always gave the biggest amount, more than anyone else. She built houses for widows, gave food to the poor, and sponsored young women's education. The church praised her, calling her a true angel of generosity. Many admired her, seeing her as a blessing to the community, unaware of the darkness that lurked beneath her beauty. But not everyone was fooled. Some people noticed odd things about Ego. Her father's old mansion where all the wedding took place never seemed to age, nor did she. Servants who worked there for years said she never had a single wrinkle on her face, her hair never turned gray. Some whispered that she bathed in strange herbs at midnight, while others swore they saw shadows moving behind the windows when no one was inside. The air around her estate always felt colder, even in the heat of the sun. One night, a maid working in the mansion heard strange noises coming from the basement. Her curiosity got the better of her, and she tiptoed down the grand staircase, holding a candle. As she opened the heavy wooden door, a gust of cold air hit her face. She stepped inside and gasped. The walls were lined with old portraits of men who had once been Eagle's husbands. Below each portrait was a glass case holding personal belongings, a watch, a wedding band, a pocket square. She covered her mouth to stifle a scream, realizing the terrible truth. But before she could run, a hand grabbed her shoulder. Now, before we continue, if you have watched up until now, it is because you enjoyed the story. Please be kind enough to give this video a like, drop your comments, and subscribe for more interesting stories like this. Now back to the story. It was Eagle. With a chilling smile, Eagle whispered, "Some secrets are better left undiscovered." The maid was never seen again. Then, she met Hugo. He was young, strong, and ambitious. Unlike the others, he had heard whispers about Eagle's past but didn't believe them. How could such a beautiful woman be dangerous? She was kind, generous, and irresistible. He fell for her charm, and after a few months, he proposed. Eagle, smiling, accepted. The wedding was just as grand as the others. Guests filled the mansion, music played, and food was served in abundance. But as the guests danced, Eagle was already planning. Hugo was the happiest man alive. But his joy didn't last long. That night, when the guests had left, Eagle led Hugo to the backyard. The moon was bright, reflecting on the deep pond behind the house. She smiled sweetly, suggesting they play a game. Trusting her, Hugo agreed. She blindfolded him, giggling as she tied weights to his legs. "Are you ready?" she whispered. Before he could respond, she pushed him into the water. Coldness swallowed him, pulling him down. He struggled, kicking, but the weights were too heavy. Eagle stood at the edge, watching, waiting for him to stop moving before she went inside to sip her expensive red wine as she always did at the end of every operation. The cold water swallowed him. He sank fast, his heart hammering. But something went wrong, the chain snapped. With every ounce of strength, Hugo fought his way to the surface. He gasped for air, his lungs burning. Eagle was enjoying her red wine, too tipsy to realize something had gone wrong. She trusted herself, she had never failed before. Hugo didn't stop to think. He swam to the shore and ran into the dense forest behind the mansion. Branches cut his skin, but he kept going. He ran until he saw lights in the distance. A police station. That night, the police stormed Eagle's house. It took more than a dozen officers to hold her down. She was strong, stronger than anyone had expected. But they overpowered her and took her away. The next morning, they drained the pond. What they found made the whole town shudder. Bones. Dozens of them. The remains of every husband Eagle had ever married. As the officers searched the mansion, they found even more chilling evidence. A secret underground chamber filled with wedding suits, rings, and photographs of every man who had gone missing. There were old journals, filled with strange writings, spells, rituals, dark incantations. Ego was taken to trial, but even behind bars, she did not weep or beg. She only smiled. "You think this is over," she whispered to the guards. "You have no idea." At night, the officers on duty reported hearing laughter echoing from her cell. Some claimed to see her eyes glow in the darkness. But the most terrifying part. The mansion was abandoned, yet lights still flickered in the windows, and some swore they saw a shadow moving in the backyard, right by the pond. Weeks after her arrest, one of the officers visited the mansion, determined to prove there was nothing supernatural about the place. He entered the house, flashlight in hand. As he reached the grand staircase, a sudden chill filled the air. The door slammed shut behind him. Then, he heard it, a soft whisper in the darkness, calling his name. He turned, his flashlight flickering. And then, just as suddenly as he had entered, he was gone. The mansion remained empty, but the legend of Ego lived on. Some say she was a demon, others say she had made a deal with the devil himself. But one thing was certain, her story was far from over.